Hey everyone, how's it going? Juan Dhas here, and welcome to this week's YouTube lesson. And today, we're going to be talking a little bit about counterpoint. And for any of the classical people watching out there, please bear in mind this is kind of a dummy's view of counterpoint. I'm more of an improviser than I am a classical composer or a classical musician. So while I do take from a lot of the rules of counterpoint that are traditional, and I will talk about them here, they're going to be kind of discussed in layman's terms for anyone who wants to apply this as an improviser. And I think it's kind of worked its way enough that even though I don't really use it on the level of someone as like Antoine Boyer, who's really schooled in classical counterpoint, it's become enough of a part of my sound that I think it's something that merits talking about. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to tackle 3 key points that I think are essential for anyone to consider when they start diving into counterpoint. Also, yes, we've had a bit of a gear upgrade. You can hear my voice a little clearer. So hopefully it makes this video a little better, and it's the first step in hopefully improving the video quality on the channel. So thank you to everyone for helping out with that. So let's talk about counterpoint. And there are 3 things I think that need to be discussed when it comes to using counterpoint. And this might sound familiar to anyone who's taken a counterpoint or a music theory class, and maybe might be a little confusing for some people, but I'm going to try and make it as clear as possible. So the first thing I think people need to consider is motion and the idea of what counterpoint itself actually means. So counterpoint is really 2 or more voices working completely independently, or rather interdependently. Sometimes they might lean into each other, but for the most part, if you were to separate them out, they would actually work in and of themselves as standalone melodies. So I think immediately just understanding that little thing helps to kind of put forward an idea of how to play with counterpoint. So I was playing with All the Things You Are in the beginning. It's a standard I really love, one that I probably overplay, but it's a great tune and it lends itself to this. So you see, like, even if I have a top voice, I can have a bottom voice going. Do some variation. If I were to do it even much simpler than that. Right? Right? Maybe have a small melody in the bottom. So you have these individual voices that are working, and it's kind of important to emphasize that when you're working with counterpoint, that you have 2 separate voices, and you can kind of do that through your dynamics. I've talked about that in the articulation videos. Do that with the lines themselves. Maybe one line is more active than the other. Sometimes the top line is static and the bottom line moves a lot more. For example, if I were to just keep the A flat in the top. and then have the two lines kind of weave in and out of each other. Now this is just 2-line counterpoint. This applies to 3-line counterpoint, although when I'm improvising on this like I'm doing right now, I'm not really consciously thinking of 3 independent lines moving all the time. And you'll notice sometimes I'll have these little motion fillers to simulate that third voice, but it kind of pops in and out. It's not true 3-line counterpoint where each part is individually woven in and out of each other. So I really want to emphasize that point and think about motion, think about the lines moving in and of themselves, and remember contrary motion is always extremely helpful, though you can move in similar motion for some aspects of it, but try not to do that for a long time. You want to maintain an independence of the parts. The next thing I want to tackle is consonances and dissonances, and I think in understanding the first two, you're probably already well on your way to counterpoint. This might already lead to some people, rolling their eyes and thinking, okay, this sounds a lot like my high school or college music theory class, but this is a really important step of counterpoint and what makes it contrapuntal, what gives it that sound. So first, let's break it down really simply. What are consonances? These are points of stability or points of resolution. They can either be your unisons. Yeah, I got my volume. So it can be points of resolution such as a unison, a fifth, or an octave. Those are your perfect consonances. And then you have your imperfect consonances, which are your thirds and your sixths. So these are stable, they're non-obtrusive, right? They're and I touch on this a lot with my students just about improvisation in general. Actually, just understanding counterpoint, period, is a great way of getting to understand harmony and how to really weave through changes, but maybe that's a topic for another day. So, thirds and sixths, if we're in the key of C, right? We can have unisons, fifths, octaves, thirds, and or sixths. The fourth is a perfect interval, but it's generally considered a dissonance. And the dissonances are pretty much everything else. Now, how does this apply when we're coming up with counterpoint? Well, your resolutions always have to be stable. You see I'm using a lot of thirds. Well, what if I were to use some of those other resolution points? Yeah, that would, for the D flat, we can go, sorry. That's also another resolution point. It might be a weaker resolution, but it's important to understand that. And understanding how you resolve from one point to the other is really valuable. So if you're just first starting out with this, a great exercise to do is take a tune like All the Things You Are and just play one-to-one counterpoint. This actually gets into my next point. I'm going to go with that. Just one note against one note, so you're not thinking too much. Right? Just thirds. You can try this with fifths. So let's do, right? And we're going to have a diminished fifth here. That's another consonant you can try with the octaves. You can try with sixths. So let's say, it's going to be a little weird though for some of the chords. So, but it's important to understand. Where would I go from here? See, some of it doesn't work if you're thinking minor sixth, so you got to remember the diatonic sound. It sounds kind of weird actually when you think about it. Right? And then we go to D flat, and then or if we were to do something a little more That's a little more pleasing to the ear. So some of these might work, some of these might not. Try it out. Just try one-to-one counterpoint with each of the consonances and see what happens. And it'll be a great way to start building a foundation for yourself. Now, the last thing I wanted to talk about is species counterpoint. And specifically, I'm probably going to tackle the first 4 just to so you get a quick understanding of what that entails. Now, some people might hear species counterpoint and think, okay, this is suddenly getting way over my head, but as I said, I'm kind of making a dummies version. If you want really in-depth counterpoint explanation, I'm sure there are a number of channels. I think maybe Alan Belkin, if I remember his name. He's an he teaches orchestration and composition from a classical perspective, but I think he has some stuff on counterpoint that's incredibly useful and very applied, so go check that out. Now, species counterpoint involves species 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And when you actually understand it and break it down, it's quite simple, but the way I like to look at it is it opens up my textural and rhythmic choices. Rhythmic in a very abstract sense, because I wouldn't call counterpoint the most rhythmically intricate form of writing. So species 1 is essentially 1-to-1. It's the simplest form of counterpoint, and I recommend mastering this, or at least getting a very solid understanding of this, because this is going to be your framework whenever you improvise or whenever you write counterpoint, right? So 1-to-1. You have one note in the bass, one note, and we're just doing this with 2 voices, right? This would apply for 3, 4, however many parts you want to do. So I'm just using this first A section of, right? That's the basic thing. And you can play around with that as you see fit. It doesn't just have to be thirds. It can go 3rd to 5th. You can play around with it a little more, have some freedom. Then we move to species 2, which is 2 against 1. So you have 1 in the bass note. Let's keep that. Right? Let's keep that for every chord change. And then I might have 2 notes for this. So see, now we start moving into different territory. And you can, here's the thing, the bass doesn't have to be the 1s all the time. You can flip it. So I can have 2-to-1, but the bass voice is moving, so. Or I can mix the 2 voices. Then we have species 3. Species 3 is either 4-to-1 or 3-to-1. So this is what I was doing in the beginning. Right? So think about it from that perspective. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And you see the bass is still keeping that. You can do this with the bass voice as well. Okay, here we go. I'm singing a harmony without realizing it. Right? I started drifting into different territory. And then another common one, and this probably lends itself more to the guitar, is species 4. Species 4 is where you have notes tying over, I believe. Someone please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. You have suspensions in there, so I can do something like that. Stuff like that, where you start to get a little bit more colorful with that. And if you're just sticking to pure 2-line counterpoint, that would mean hard to improvise, actually. Right? I tried to keep it as two-line as possible. And for anyone who's curious, Species 5 is kind of a combination of all of the above, not really sticking too much to one or the other. Bear in mind, as I said, this is applied in an improvisational context. It's quite difficult to maintain improvisation with this, and also because I'm looking at this from the lens of a jazz musician, some of what under classical terminology might be considered a dissonance, I'm not really treating it as a dissonance, I'm just treating it as a color. So full disclosure, I wouldn't say this is the most traditional or classically relevant counterpoint. I probably very well am breaking many of the traditional rules of counterpoint, but I am at least aware of them to some degree. So there are a couple of exercises you can do, and I'm going to dive over to Patreon and really cover that in more depth. Basically, the point being is that the idea is you can take counterpoint and just really experiment with it, move it forward, and play around with a few ideas on a tune. So I hope this is helpful for you guys, and I will see you in the next video.